Almost every Christian alive can probably give a basic account of what happened on Easter and the days that immediately preceded it. The death and resurrection of Jesus is what the Christian faith relies upon. In fact, without it, there would be no Christian faith. But there's a part of the Easter story that you most likely haven't heard about. A very important detail of the story that's right there in black and white that we often skip right over. Or at most, in the 60 years that I've heard sermons and teaching on Easter, the teacher or pastor, they don't even really know what to make of it. Trust me, if you come to understand this detail, you will never look at Easter in the same way. So please, I ask that you just give me 5 minutes here to explain what I'm talking about. Well, Jesus died and was resurrected when he was probably about 33 years old. For the preceding 3 years or so, he conducted his ministry on this earth. And he went around preaching the kingdom of God, healing the sick, casting out demons, raising the dead, and performing many other miracles that validated who he was. I look at that period of time as the credentialing of Jesus. Now, what I mean by this is that Jesus passed all the tests and accomplished the things necessary for him to fulfill all the prophecies found in the Old Testament for him to be considered the Messiah and to be handed the keys of all realms of creation by his Father in heaven. First, Jesus never gave in to temptation. He led a sin-free life. His human body was created to embody the very image of his Father Yahweh. Well, like Adam, Jesus' body was created with direct intervention of our Creator God as he was born of a virgin. And of course, there is his baptism, where he was declared to be God's Son by a voice from heaven. He demonstrated miraculous abilities, which substantiated his authority to forgive sins. Through his life, he consistently mirrored the image of his Father in heaven, and he demonstrated his authority by doing things like casting out demons. On the real Mount of Transfiguration, probably Mount Hermon in the far north of Israel, the place where still today you can find around 36 sites containing ancient pagan god places of worship, the region of Bashan, a stronghold of evil and demonic activity. It was there that Jesus met with Moses and Elijah in the presence of just a few of his disciples and in earshot of all the very real pagan gods, the fallen spiritual beings that may have been present. Well, Yahweh there declared that Jesus is his son and you need to do what he says. Then Jesus goes and he demonstrates that he holds the keys of death by raising the dead, including Lazarus and others. And then finally, he raised himself from the dead into his new immortal body. Now, this not only provided for the atonement of our sins, but it demonstrated to Satan that there was nothing that he could do to Jesus. Well, these are but a few of the important things that Jesus showed the world why he alone could ever possibly be worthy to fulfill the requirements of being not only the Messiah, but the Son of God with a capital S. In the book of Revelation, chapter 5, there's this scroll that's sealed with 7 seals. Now, this scroll contains the will of God for how the end of this age that we're currently living in is going to play out. As the scene plays out in chapter 5, this question is asked, who is worthy to open the scroll? Well, John, the guy who wrote Revelation, he starts to weep because there's no one on heaven or earth who is found worthy to open it. But then somebody says, hey, John, stop your crying. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Well, of course, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is Jesus. Well, all these things that I mentioned that Jesus accomplished on this earth, this credentialing, make up much of the reason that Jesus was declared to be the one and only in all heaven and earth worthy to open this scroll. It's because he's the risen Son of God who accomplished all the tests, passing with 100%, that he'd been given all the necessary authority. But when exactly was Jesus given all this authority? I know, it was always his Father's will, his sovereign plan for Jesus, his son, to have this authority. But I believe we can pinpoint exactly when that occurred after he did what was necessary in human form. Well, okay, so remember, Jesus was put to death on a Friday afternoon and placed in a tomb by that evening. He rose from the dead on Sunday morning. Well, at the tomb, he first encountered Mary Magdalene, who he had previously cast out 7 demons from. Jesus had a short conversation with her, and during that time, when she finally recognized him, the Apostle John tells us that Mary wanted to give Jesus a big old hug. But Jesus said this, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." The Gospels tell us that later the same day, the day we now celebrate the anniversary of what we call Easter, Jesus appeared to 2 guys traveling down the road to a place called Emmaus. Well, after they recognized him, they ran back as like 7 miles to Jerusalem to tell the disciples about Jesus was in fact raised from the dead. They had just spoken with him. Well, these 2 guys found the disciples, or the rest of the disciples, in the upper room. They were talking about and freaking out about the events of the day. Well, then Jesus shows up in this locked room and appeared to them. And he says this, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your heart? See my hands, my feet? That is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones that you see that I have." Well, did you get that? Later the same day that Jesus told Mary she could not touch him because he had not yet ascended to his Father, he was now encouraging all of them to touch him. What happened between these 2 times? Obviously, while the disciples were running around freaking out in disbelief and confusion, Jesus had been to see his Father, and it was now okay for everybody to touch him. Let me recite this passage from Daniel chapter 7 that I believe describes this meeting between the Ancient of Days, Yahweh, who sits on the throne in heaven, and who I believe to be Jesus, who's called the Son of Man in Daniel's vision. To set up the scene, Daniel had just described a scene in heaven where the one called the Ancient of Days was sitting on his throne. The Ancient of Days is, of course, Yahweh, our Creator. Okay, so this is Daniel talking here. "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people and nation and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." This is an awesome vision of heaven, where one like a son of man, in other words, a human, as opposed to the angelic beings also present in heaven and probably in the vision, came riding in on the clouds. Now you got to understand this. In the ancient world, clouds and cloud riding was reserved for the gods. In the Old Testament, it was only Yahweh who could ride in the clouds, no human. But now this was a guy, a human, the Son of Man, riding into heaven on the clouds. It's here, at this time, just after Jesus rose from the dead, completing his final credentialing, that he was presented to his Father as a human, the Son of Man, and he was given it all, dominion and glory and an everlasting kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. This is like graduation day for Jesus. It was like he was given this graduation gift like a kid would get a fancy new car, except for Jesus, it was the honor of riding in on the clouds like his Father. After accomplishing everything that he did on the earth, he was formally presented to the Ancient of Days and given everything. Again, the disciples, currently oblivious to what's going on with Jesus, are running around in disbelief in spite of Mary being told by Jesus, "I'm going to see my God and your God." Jesus often called himself the Son of Man. Some say it's because he was trying to let us know that he was just a regular guy like us, just any other human. However, Jesus was very familiar with the book of Daniel and this passage where the Son of Man is seen. During the Olivet Discourse, when Jesus was informing his disciples about the second coming, he referred to himself 7 times as the Son of Man. Jesus referred to and even quoted the writings of the prophet Daniel several times during that talk. I believe when he called himself the Son of Man, he was talking about this passage in Daniel chapter 7. He was saying that the cloud rider guy is me. He was claiming that he was the cloud riding Messiah. Jesus told his disciples that some of them would not taste death until they saw Jesus coming into his kingdom. The scene that plays out in Daniel chapter 7 is exactly that. It's Jesus being handed the keys to his kingdom. At this point, it was only Judas that had died. So saying he was the Son of Man was not Jesus reminding us of his humanity. It was his claim to being the Messiah, the cloud rider. Later, just prior to ascending to heaven, Jesus informed his disciples of the authority that he had now been given when he said this. This is found in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18. I just think it's 18. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Well, most Christians are Trinitarians, believing that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. Well, this scene looks like in heaven that plays out with a very human-looking Jesus, so it's doubtful that Daniel's vision has to do with a pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity who's been given authority. The Gospels never record any time prior to or after Jesus rose from the dead when he ascended to heaven to see his Father, other than when he finally ascended. It's only after he rose from the dead we're told of such an event. And we know that before he finally ascended to heaven, some 40 days after his resurrection, that he then told his disciples he had received all authority on heaven and earth. It must be the ascension to heaven that Jesus told Mary about was about to happen, where Jesus and when Jesus was presented to his Father and was given his kingdom. As we celebrate what Jesus accomplished and what Easter means to us, don't forget the rest of the story, what it's the anniversary of for Jesus. He became the King of Kings and Lord of Lords for accomplishing what he did on that day. Happy Easter, Jesus. You had quite a day. God bless you, and Maranatha.